just working through the dOW 30 today. So Apple first up, really very little progress still. We're kind of doing these videos for the last month and a half, and you can see still just holding up, upper levels, but no bite or no real commitment to any sort of rallies yet. Feels like maybe there's a flush lower to maybe reset it, but yeah, just no real obvious action here. Maybe we'll see something over the next few weeks, but just continues to drift, and you can see the relative here still weak. So of the Mag 7, definitely the one that's been left behind more recently. Amgen, yeah, very disappointing that this hasn't built on some of the gains here. I think this is a big spot for it. I'd be surprised if it can't hold up down into this area, which is in around 264. If it doesn't, then I think it's really back into very messy territory. There's a bit of a head and shoulders here, which it's not perfect, but not great. Price action's poor. It should be holding on to more of the gains, but perhaps an opportunity to see if it can nibble around current levels. Amazon, very strong. You compare this relative to the Apple relative, and they're completely chalk and cheese. Trying to get out of this range, very impressive. Definitely extended here from this low, but only marginally above the 2020 and 2021 highs, so has room. Probably like to see it hang around for a bit longer. I think that would be just a better setup, but we'll see how it plays out. But certainly the relative is telling you it's a leader. AXP, yeah, these are like, if anyone watched the video earlier, it's just like the Alliances, Axes, like they've had great runs. Feels like there's a little bit, we've got to wait and see what earnings are now, and the ball is in, I guess, the fundamental court now to whether or not they can deliver. Price action's good. I think ideally you'd like to see this just go sideways for a little while and set up another move. We'll see, but certainly solid. Boeing, a bit like Apple, it just cannot get out of its own way. These rallies get sold, news flow's weak, and it feels like it needs to get through this 177 and see then can you get a bit of, I guess, volatility on the other side to reset it. Maybe it gets above 200 and things look a bit different, but it's just still very slow price action. And again, when you compare it to something else in that group, there's no reason to be in it. Cat, super strong, really hasn't looked back. I think it's benefiting more recently from the materials type trade that seems to be playing out. Big base, big breakout. The only thing, as we said in the past with Cat, is it tends not to trend for very long, so kind of just feel like I'd be using as a lead indicator for something as opposed to maybe it being the vehicle to play a trend. CRM, this actually is a bit like Amazon in terms of the structure, and arguably playing out a bit better in that it peaked above, it's come back in, it's very tight. Can this get out of this, which is a 3 or 4 year range, and extend? If it does, then look, I think you're into a really interesting spot. But we'll just wait and see. But nice to see that they're letting these names hold up. Cisco, weak. Right sector, wrong stock. Chevron, these lines have been there for a while, a bit like the European names, reacted exactly where you want them to react. I think here, the tighter this gets below this, I guess the more optimistic we become that this is heading for 200 and above. The relative here, which is versus the S&P, I think lots to like about that kind of, it hasn't performed since 2022. That's November 2022, and just trying to now round higher with a good absolute price setup. So I think there's definitely reasons to be to like that. Disney, look, definitely trying to bottom. This gap here, well supported. Never got below this 106, which is definitely encouraging. Now you've got this 113, 114 to support. Like, it's, it certainly feel like the worst is over for it, but the challenge really is that, like, it's probably picked off 2 or 3 of the easier spots in terms of getting going. This 125 is a bigger nut to crack, and we'll see if it can get above there. If it does, then this 200 it probably happens quick enough. But the better trade now would be just a sort of a rangy 117, 115 to 125 for a while to set up a break back above. Let's see if that happens. Dow, yeah, pretty good. Trending, trying to trend. Goldman's, it's just going to be a really big earnings season for these. Like, these are not as extended as the banks, because of JP Morgan or something like that. And it's a very, very clean, can it get above 425, 426 and extend? You would think it can based on the setup here. It's not particularly extended coming into it, and it has room, so I think it's one to watch. Coming into numbers, Home Depot, I think it's probably out of play. Good move up to 400, but couldn't hold it. It's coming back now to sort of retest, but if you look at that pullback, it just feels like it's a little bit too much compared to what you would expect. Like, even going back to the Goldman's, one chart back, it's tighter, it's holding closer to the prior highs, and that generally is a better setup. You'd also look at the relative here versus the S&P. You didn't get a new relative high as you got a new absolute high. Look, it's no doubt it's high quality and all that, but I think this just is going to need more time, and it's hard to do much with it here. Honeywell, just sideways, big range. Hasn't participated in industrials the way it used to, which is disappointing. IBM, very similar to SAP in Europe. Big move, has held, given almost nothing back. You would expect that it goes higher. Obviously, when you zoom these out, like, this is clearing some monster levels, so it's very impressive price action. It tells you that there's still buyers in that sector. Intel, by contrast, not the same. The relative here is different, and it's really drifty as it looks to try and make new relative lows in the best subgroup in the market. So it's definitely a worry. This area is support down into the 35s. There's a lot going on there. Potentially it's a good setup into numbers if it's so weak, because maybe the pain has been taken, but definitely a worry that it hasn't been stronger. J&J, drifting. Arguably downside is probably limited enough given the type of stock it is, but this relative is still very weak, making new lows. You would think this area, which is probably, I'm going to just be generous and go to about here, which is sort of 150, 145, probably a spot where you would think it can find support. Maybe it gets to this 140, but no obvious reason to be involved. JP Morgan, I guess it's just thinking about it where, like, if you look at this point where my cursor is, like, that's kind of where Goldman sits, and you just wonder, is that the template for something like Goldman's where it just gets tight and goes? Like, JP Morgan's been the best bank, the cleanest, the easiest, nothing wrong with it at all, but I would just think the bar is higher coming into numbers for it than like the likes of Goldman's and Morgan's. Coca-Cola, didn't get over this trend line, almost perfect there in terms of the failure, but maybe it can rebuild for another one. Very clean setup if it does, and that's your point there. If it can get above and stay above this trend line, it's got a lot of room. So I think it's giving you a nice little short-term setup here. This support at 58 needs to hold. If it doesn't, we're vulnerable because it's coming back down here. But maybe it can reset and tighten up and get up into this area. If it does, it's certainly interesting. Relative would not inspire a whole lot of confidence, but we'll see. McDonald's, poor. Probably an opportunity because it tends not to like underperform, or sorry, from an absolute perspective, get too far below this moving average. But definitely no bid there. From a short-term perspective, probably looking for this area to see could it reset and get back above 270. More feels like it's going to have to get down to this 250 and see what it looks like down there. But and I think unless it becomes a lead indicator for Coca-Cola, you'd probably have Coke above it just now. 3M, yeah, the worst industrial for a long time, but to be fair, acts a bit better, maybe. Merck, this, looks okay. It's given back a bit more than you'd want, but still, well above the breakout area. You'd like to see this get a bit of a bite sooner rather than later. Microsoft, very, very strong. Look at the way that, this is very interesting relative that it's tightening up once more for, potentially a new high. The absolute has really, given, nothing back. Like often post these breaks, they'll say that like you'd like to see them tighten up for, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, and it's probably been textbook in that regard. We'll see if that means higher prices, but it certainly has a nice look about it. Nike does not have a nice look about it. Relative is terrible. However, we are back into this sort of 90 area, which has held in the past. They certainly would need to get the stock moving in the opposite direction. I think you need it at least above 94 to be interesting once more. Otherwise, it's kind of just you're played around the edges. Definitely hard work compared to some others, and even from the piece today, Adidas looks a cleaner setup. But maybe there's ways to look at Nike that isn't just the conventional straight line. Procter, it's more like Coke than McDonald's, but not super either. But I don't think it, like, you compare it to McDonald's, it's not nearly as far away from where the action might be, which is clearing 160. It's still above the 200 day. The relative isn't great, but it certainly rank it above McDonald's as maybe it has a chance to reset. Not super compelling, but we'll probably be patient with it. Travelers, very strong. Great breakout, kept going. Yes, it's extended, but it doesn't look like, when you look even on the daily, it's not like it's crazy, and the relative is probably just steadily grinding, so hard to fault it. United Health, these are really weak. Like this bottom end of the range, look, I'm sure there's definitely people looking at it as a potentially this range holds and it's a long-term opportunity, but probably just still be nervous that there's been so little appetite to buy these back from these have been super winners, and it's just a bit worrying that there's not much of a bounce, and that's like you're seeing it with the others too, so just something to be wary of. Visa probably looks like a neat pullback into a rising moving average. doubt you're going to see a huge amount of sellers. Relative is just sideways, but yeah, I think that looks still pretty solid. Verizon, yeah, improving a bit, but it's Verizon, so I'm not going to waste any time. And Walmart, a bit like Visa really in terms of that, the pullback still looks pretty orderly. It's come out of a big base or a big range, and the moving average, that's a 200, but the shorter ones are up here. They're hidden. So still looks like it's a viable pullback in a bigger trend. So yeah, hopefully that's useful.